Good morning, everyone. We're so glad you can join us here for this Sunday forum I call Global Lutheran Connections, our relationship with the Central African Republic. We have three wonderful presenters here. We have Caroline Eberhard, Carolyn Jacobs, and Lucky Swallow. And so just a couple of ground rules. If you're online, please keep yourselves muted until there's a Q&A portion. When the Q&A portion happens, unmute yourself and ask away. We will make room for the people who are online. And if you're in person here, and if you have a comment or a question, if you could just speak a little slowly, speak a little louder, and then what the presenters will do is probably repeat the question for the mic. And it's mainly so that our recording can sound great. If there's no other questions or introductory comments, I will let Veronique begin, and I will share this screen. All right.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, you online. It's nice to be here today. So we're going to talk about the Central African Republic. Just a few words on the committee. Why do we talk about that? It's because there is a committee on the Central African Republic that is from the Synod, and we are here, the committee, we are from the member, obviously, from Christ the King. And this committee is composed of about 11 members from around the Synod, and we meet online once per trimester, sometimes more, depending on what is in the agenda, what we have to do. And Caroline Jacob is the president. And Lucky is a long-standing member, went to CAR in 2011. I'm one of the newest member, I mean, a few years already. I'm the co-director with Caroline, and I'm going to be in CAR in a month. So, yeah. Just quickly, we're going to present each other and say why we're a member of this committee. Quickly for me, I joined first of all because Caroline asked me nicely, and she can't refuse when Caroline is asking. Second, obviously, I'm French, so I do have some really historical interest in understanding and being part of maybe helping this country go back into its feet after a long history of trouble, as we're going to see today. And that's basically what it is, and to make sure that, you know, what we can do in this synod is being done for this country.
I've been a member on Global Mission Team. It started as a Global Mission Team since 2004. Phil Dahlberg invited me to a meeting when there was a visitor here. The first woman who was ordained in the church in CAR was visiting our synod, and so I attended that. We had a Global Mission Team for a few years, but then we've now, for quite some time, had separate teams for each of our companions in the Peru and the CAR team. And I've been chairing this since we started the CAR team, and I'm hoping that Veronique is going to eventually take over. She's the co-chair now. She spends a lot of time in France, so we have to get her to stay here more. And I'll let Lucky introduce himself, but I just wanted to mention a few other people. We have a couple people from the Brenham area, but they're older and they listen in, but they don't really participate much anymore. But Mark Workmaker from Kinsman. We had another really strong member from Kinsman, Judy Biffle, but she died a year ago. It was a big loss for us. And of course, Bishop Reinhardt is he always sits in on our team. He's the one in the Synod who's responsible for the team. We have an African participant occasionally, Gilbert Ruella, who's a pastor at the Umoja Church that's meeting at Memorial Campus. He's working though, so a lot of times he can't participate. Charles Short from Louisiana is a longtime member. And we have a new member, Melanie Nelson. I'm not sure which congregation she's in now, but she's just recently joined and is very enthusiastic. Lucky, you want to say how you joined?
I joined because Carolyn told me to. After I get back from my trip. The reasons why I care about CAR will be obvious from the presentation I give, so I won't go into all that now. But I do think, Carolyn has managed this group for at least 15 years in an incredible way. So, she deserves a lot of thanks for keeping this alive in our synod and promoting it. I guess that's it really. So, I'll let Veronique speak. She's got the first part of the presentation.
So we to start this presentation with a few quick geopolitical. Do you hear me well? Quick geopolitical facts. I'm not going to go through the whole history, but quickly so that you understand what's going on in CAR. First of all, okay. Population estimated, that's CAR, this little thing, it's in the middle, Central African Republic, central, in the middle. So that's why it's taking its name from. Population is estimated, it's actually 6.1 million from 2001. So I see that it didn't shift, but 2023, now it grew since 21. And so we have a few facts in here. Most live in the West, where actually the Lutherans are the strongest. There is no electrical grid, no running water. Subsistence farming predominate as economic model. So few facts: 3.4 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, and a quick proportion. We tend to think that sub-Saharan African countries are mostly Muslims. That's not the case in CAR. 50% of the population is Christian. 15 Muslim and 33 are traditional tribal belief. So that's interesting to keep that in mind. So we have to, as we see, the CAR is a landlocked country in Central Africa. It's bordered clockwise by Chad, Sudan, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Cameroon. Some of those countries have been in war, in trouble, since decades, and everything is, of course, influencing also the political reality of CAR. The land area covers about 240,000 square miles, and so it's big. It's a big country for small populations. So CAR has significant mineral deposits, other resources such as uranium reserves, crude oil, gold, diamonds, cobalt, lumber, hydropower, as well as significant quantities of fertile and arable land. And yet, CAR is among the 10 poorest countries in the world, with the lowest GDP per capita. And according to the Human Development Index, the country is ranking 188 out of 191 countries. It has the lowest inequality adjusted Human Development Index, ranking 156 out of 156 countries. So it's amongst the poorest of the poorest country, even in Africa and in the world. And as you can see, that's also the country the least affected by light pollution. So please, Lucky, if you can remind me to pack some flashlights because I'm gonna need them. So, not surprisingly, so there is a huge humanitarian need. So here a few snapshots. We'll see what with Lucky what the ELCA and what we are doing in this country. So you can see there on top left there is humanitarian workers discussing with Chadian asylum seeker in Bedaka. So then this is on the people are being stuck. It's actually humanitarian workers trying to free a car stuck in the mud during a mission in Yalinga. And down here, it's an integrated village of Pladama Waka, which is, I believe these villages are built for refugees. So this is not a tradition, it's not a traditional village. It's a village really built especially.
Internal displaced.
I think it's, yeah, you're right, internal displaced people, you're right. So this is a new village built for people who have to flee one side of the country because there is rebels, as we're gonna see, doing mayhem. So they built, these villages are pretty new. So a little bit of history, because this is where it started. So the country borders were I mean, before France, you had the race trade and all history dating like 6,000 years before Christ. So it's a country which has a rich and long history. But we're going to start with France, which ruled the country as a colony, starting in the late 19th century. And the borders were established by France. And France ruling of CAR was among the worst treatment inflicted to its colonies. France had a lot of colonies and was not cruel to all of these colonies, but CAR was particularly, the ruling in CAR was among the worst. And forced displacement, forced labors, etc. Half of the population perished during the colonial period. And France, since then, since the 60s, repeatedly meddled in CAR after the independence. 1960 is the year of the independence. So though a state was constructed, it was centralized in Bangui, which is at the very south of the country. It's on the border. And it was focused on extracting wealth. And we saw there is a lot of that. Wealth creation for an elite few. So really a few people have been able to have access to this wealth creation. After gaining independence from France, the Central African Republic was ruled by a series of autocratic leaders, including an abortive attempt at a monarchy, and many coups, fraudulent election, and a civil war in 2004, first or second civil war in 2004, 2007, which is called the Bush War. Those coups and wars were due to, a lot of the time, a rival political faction, personal ambition. Rebel militias were created along with a gradual loss of public trust in the political class and process. So that's until now, until 2012, I would say. Today, CAR is the scene of an ongoing civil war, which started in 2012. It would be the second, I would say the third even. There is some civil wars. And which is basically between, you have two factions, the mostly Muslim rebel alliance, which is called Seleka, and the mostly Christian self-defense groups known as Anti-Balaka. And there again, a lot of atrocities have been perpetrated by all factions, and there is also, the country has its own army. So it's a lot of people fighting in this country. As of 2016, there is a new president, which is President Faustin Archange Touadéra. He was first elected in 2016, then re-elected in the first round in December 2020. And he's basically held in place thanks to Russian mercenaries from the Wagner group, as well as the Rwanda, a nearby country, who have supported President Faustin Archange Touadéra in the fight against the rebels. CAR's army had long struggled to face rebel groups, but the arrival of Wagner and Rwanda bilateral forces have strengthened its hands and pushing new rebel groups out of provincial towns for the first time in at least a decade. So, is it good? At the first time, Russia's Wagner group has been accused of harassing and intimidating civilians, of course. In December 2022, Roger Cohen writes in the New York Times, Wagner shock troops form a Praetorian Guard, so he has his own guard for Mr. Touadéra, who is also protected by Rwandan forces, so he has two Praetorian Guards. In return for an untaxed license to exploit and export the Central African Republic's resources. And one Western ambassador called the Central African Republic basically a vassal state of the Kremlin. Touadéra himself can hardly pass as a hero of democracy. He recently passed a new constitution that removes presidential term limits, allowing him to extend his stay in power forever. We know how it works. So still, after years of violence and extortion by armed groups, Central African largely supports the prospect of territorial integrity, and many are grateful to Wagner mercenaries for their support. So nothing black and white as we can see. So the pictures here, so we can see top left, right, sorry, on the right, it's a displaced woman, just to see. She uses one of newfound booth in Bria to stay in contact with the family. So a little bit of, they don't have all this nice device. Obviously, this good old telephone is still there. Top right, Central African soldier stand guards during the visit by the president. So that's army. And in the south, these are Wagner groups, mercenaries who protect President Faustin Archange Touadéra at a rally at 17 July 2023, very recent. And unsurprisingly, we have a population in distress. From all that we've seen, the history and the present, the wars, the rebels, revolution, everything. So the civil war perpetuated the country's poor human rights record. It was characterized by widespread and increasing abuses by various participating armed groups, arbitrary imprisonment, torture, restriction of freedom of the press, and freedom of movement. So according to Doctors Without Borders, CAR has the lowest life expectancy of just 54 years, nearly 2 decades younger than the global average, which is 73 years. The child mortality ranks among the highest globally, and pregnant women face a substantial risk of death or severe illness due to the scarcity of gynecologists. According to the World Health Organization and Ministry of Health, less than half of healthcare facilities in CAR are fully operational, and there are about 0.6 doctors for every 10,000 people. 0.6. I don't know how they cut the doctor in half, but one doctor for 20,000 people, one of the lowest rations in the world. CAR is also estimated to be the unhealthiest country, as well as the worst country in which to be young. So on this picture, we see on top, it's Victorine and Crystal in the Bakaranga hospital. And then staff on the middle picture, staff from the NGO Médecins d'Afrique, who animates an education session on nutrition for mothers of severely malnourished children. And then here, this cute picture, it's a mother and a child not having a stroll in the park. They wait for a distribution of relief items in Bangassou. So this is what we witnessing now in Sierra. So, Église évangélique luthérienne de la République centrafricaine, we have to realize that French is and Sangu are the first official languages, which is one reason why I'm part of this group as well, because so that I can do some translation when needed. So it stands for Église évangélique luthérienne, Evangelical Lutheran of RCA. And mix RCA and CAR. Yeah. Well, anyway, and this is now Lucky is going to tell you what we try to do to alleviate what we just seen.
So, not surprisingly, the gospel finds a good foothold in a place that seems to be struggling under ancient types of fighting and war and struggles for power. And suffering of people. This is the actual church headquarters in Boar. That's the sign. So this is Boar is a town of about 50,000 people, maybe more. It depends on when you decide you're outside Boar, which is basically measured by how far between the villages. Kind of like here, the farther you go between neighborhoods, the more likely you've left the city, right? It's kind of the same idea. If you go out far enough, it could be 70, 80,000 people in Boar. This is one of 4 or 5 two-story buildings in the town, and that's the only commercial style buildings. Everything else are the types of homes that you saw in Veronique's pictures. So a village would be just a group of those homes. These are French colonial buildings left behind. so their state of repair is questionable at times. And they're all powered locally by generation power, like generator power. Not in Bar, but in Babwa, there were a couple things with solar power as well. So, but there's no power grid. So basically diesel generators. Some facts and figures about the church in the Central African Republic. They have 320. Oh, and by comparison, the stuff in gold is for our synod, the Texas Louisiana Gulf Coast Synod. So they have 322 congregations. We have 102. They have 120,000 members. We have 26,465. They have in CAR, Lutherans make up 10% of Protestants, 5% of all Christians, because the Christians are split 50-50 between Catholic and Protestant.
50%.
Yeah, 5 to 2.5% of the population is Lutheran, whereas in the US, 1.5% of the population is Lutheran. So they have a higher concentration of Lutherans than we do. They have 88 pastors. We have 103 active pastors, and Bishop Reinhardt, for some reason, threw in that we have more retired pastors in our synod than we have active pastors in our synod. So there's 105 retired pastors. So we either have 103 or 208, depending on what Mandy's doing today. The number of current students seeking ordination, they have 22 in the pastoral training program and 7 in the what would be their deacon training program. They don't call it that, but it's the equivalent. There are 14 pastors in our pastor training program from our synod, and there's 7 in the deacon training. And of those 21 for us, 14 are women. So I don't have the women numbers in CAR. They're going up, we hear, but they're not a high percentage yet. So what does it mean to be companion synod with the CAR? You know, many of us grew up with this idea of missionaries, and in fact, Carolyn will talk some about the history of missionaries in CAR in a little bit, but a lot of it is about what does it mean to be a missionary? What does it mean to go on a mission trip? What is it? These are all things that the Lutheran Church has dealt with really well in terms of transitioning from what might be, I'd probably call it an outdated model, at least an archaic model, or say a poorly focused model on what we do when we're in country, rather than on what we can support having happen when we're not there or when we're in a support role, which we call accompaniment. So the model of mission work in the ELCA is accompaniment. So in that sense, when Veronique goes, and by the way, she will be the first, and Bishop Reinhardt will be the first visitors from the laity, I think, at all, to visit CAR since 2011 when I went. Because within 6 months, the unrest broke out, and that was the end of trips. There were missionaries in CAR at the time supporting various programs, some teaching at the seminary, some working on water projects to provide technical guidance, some working on education, again, for technical guidance, and one nurse in healthcare providing support to the healthcare ministries. There are no missionaries left. It was too unsafe. Some ended up in Cameroon and served out their terms there because they could at least communicate back to CAR as a consultant, even if not completely present. But they're the only person left with any tie to CAR from the ELCA as a missionary type role is Willie Lange, who's been to visit our congregation a few times and stayed at our house a few times, who is the kind of site director for all of Northwestern Africa, basically. Yeah, so he has some work with CAR, but that's not his primary focus either. They strongly believe in gospel in word and gospel in act. And gospel in word are all the things that we think of as normal church work, you know, worship, theological and biblical education and training. They have strong programs for like segments of the population, youth program. There's a women's organization that's really strong. The women's conference every year is one of everyone's favorite events. Everyone from the same church, they'll pick a fabric for their church and they'll all wear dresses made of the same fabric and sing all the way there, all the way back, and riding in the few trucks that are available to haul people. So they're just back and forth trips. And then they have this neat Lutheran center that has all kinds of things going on at it, some of which will come up a little bit later, perhaps. And then gospel and act or action, their programs are for everyone. They don't do any program in the public realm where they limit who can participate in any way. They've been involved with the last, unfortunately, 10 years with conflict response. There's water projects, education projects, healthcare projects. The Women's Center, which specifically helps women train in trades so that they can make a living in a trade rather than having to rely only on farming to get by. And then there's a microfinance program, the Village Savings and Loans program, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So this is that's a church in the background there. And this is people coming out to see the white people who came to their church. We were welcomed into numerous churches. We were there for 2 Sundays. One of them happened to be Easter. Worship is incredibly festive. It's also incredibly long. Because I guess if you're a subsistence farmer during the heat of the day, what else do you want to do, right? Hang out inside. So we were doing, and there's multiple processionals. There's at least 2 choirs at every one I went to. A men's choir, a women's choir, a joint choir, a kids choir, you know. They have what's kind of like a pray garden type thing like we have now. But it runs a little differently. All the kids sit together in church. They still do a lot of separating. Men sit on one side, women on the other during church. It's not a requirement and it can be mixed up some, but it's just kind of a tradition that they have in their culture from a long time ago that they've kept. The way the children worked, I found this really intriguing and I kept trying to implement it here, but I never could talk anyone into it. All the kids sit like in a group, kind of towards the middle-ish of where the women are sitting. So they're not too far away, but they're not right in front. And there's 3 or 4 women who are basically the designated stewards of the group who have these really long, what look like reed branches or they're kind of flexible, but they're stiff. And each time some little kids start to act up, they just reach out with a stick and like tap them with it on the head so that the kid knows that they're watching them get a little bit restless. It's beautiful discipline. I didn't hear anyone shout at a kid the whole time I was there. I didn't hear anyone have to like get up and move to where the kids were. This little stick thing was magic. I assume there's some consequence on the other end of having that stick touch you too many times. That's the real enforcer here, but I never saw that part of it. This is a congregation. So this is what I said, there's multiple processions. This is the offering procession. So instead of bringing the basket to you, the basket's at the front. And similar to how we do it, a choir will be singing, but they will go through 4 or 5 numbers because they come up single file to drop in the offering by side of the church, by women's side, men's side, and even the children come with them. And it's basically dancing processional, not walking. And then the same thing happens again for communion. And if there's anything special happening, guess what? Like when white people come to visit, you get yet another procession to bring us a gift for coming to see them. So it's a lot of fun. It's very festive. It's an interesting mix of like cultural traditions and Lutheran worship techniques. You would recognize the service as Lutheran, but just with a different kind of aesthetic than the way we do it. Okay, this is my bias on display. These are my 3 favorite pictures I took when I was there. So I have a child bias. The girl on the top left is probably what, 8, 9 years old in that picture, so she'd be close to 20 today. Girl on the bottom right was 7 or 8, so same thing. And then in the middle is a picture of a mother with a baby. She was less than 20 years old. So it's kind of, my guess is that both these other girls have children by now. It's just kind of, when the life expectancy is 54, you start everything a little earlier than you might have otherwise. Conflict response, I'm glad that you had the pictures earlier because I didn't have a ton to use, so this is just going to be my text slide, sorry about that. But basically the church has been involved in humanitarian aid distribution, using churches as the place in the village where humanitarian aid is distributed. Even before the conflicts, they were part of the World Food Program. And then they're doing a lot of community restoration work, as you can imagine, with displaced people showing up, needing places to stay. There's a lot of work to kind of build and keep communities together. And then they have a fairly strong reconciliation and healing program, which think like the South African style Truth and Reconciliation, where people who formerly lived peaceably near each other or even in the same villages with each other were divided up in sectarian violence along Muslim and Christian lines, and ended up sometimes perpetrating atrocities against each other and against neighbors and not far away. So they've worked really hard to help people deal with the trauma of that, and really in many ways, maybe specifically with those who perpetrated the acts, on the kind of moral injury type work that Pastor Larson was involved in academically and actively as well. This is Springbox. Springbox is an interesting way of getting water in a country that has tons of water. You go find where there's a spring already pumping water out of the ground continuously for, I don't know, a few hundred years, and you build a filtration system into it a little bit and a pipe without a spout, and it just flows water constantly without stopping. So people who want water just come and get it. The Ubangi River runs across the south of the country, and all the water flows down to it. So there's just tons and tons of accessible water. These are super cheap to put in. 1/20th the cost of a well, I think, or even less at times, depending on how easily accessible it is. And the water coming out is, according to the testing in 2010, cleaner than Houston water, because the filtration system's so good. So it makes a big difference where people can get water without having to take it out of a place that has standing water, right? So pretty amazing. And this is the water transport method. Maybe they come with 2, 3, 4, 5 gallon jugs. That's probably a 2 or 3 gallon bucket on her head. If you've ever carried a gallon of water, you know it weighs a little over 9 pounds. She's carrying close to 25, 30 pounds on her head. That is seen every day, everywhere. And on that bump in front of her, that's a baby tied onto her that she's covered. So those are her children. And then you see this is more, it's just a continuous flow of people. You can see us in the back kind of watching what's happening. The guys in the back, a couple of them are from our North Dakota synods. The 2 synods in North Dakota are also paired with Central African Republic, and they're our partners in working with them. Here's my girl again. She never stopped smiling. I just thought she was the cutest thing. Obviously, what the church has done a good job of doing is providing infrastructure in places where the government doesn't. So the water in places where they don't have water systems, or even any form of water. Healthcare programs where there's no hospital provided or clinic provided by the government. And education in places where the government doesn't put schools. So healthcare programs. This is a clinic at Gallo. It was built by a Lutheran organization called Partners in Global Ministry. Mark Wortmaker was involved with them for a long time. This is a real nice clinic. Unfortunately, they built the hallways in a way that makes the beds hard to get through, so they had to like redo the emergency area to get the gurneys in and out. But it's got a good number of hospital beds and it's got a day clinic. And by day clinic, I mean, people walk a day, spend the night on these benches and get seen the next day. And then hopefully are well enough to walk home the next day. So it's a 3-day trip to the doctor for most of the people. If you're in a non-emergent situation, if you're in an emergent situation, whoever in the village near you or by you, and we did this, we bought, one of the things we helped fund was motorcycles for pastors so that they could use them in the church as a form of transportation to get to and from the churches, but also they're used as ambulances. So the way a motorcycle function as an ambulance is the driver sits in front, the sick person behind them, and then another person sits behind the sick person and holds on to the driver. And that's how you get. Each clinic also has a couple of vehicles that it can use to go run emergency errands to pick people up from close by. The clinic sees, there's our mother again, her newborn. The clinic sees, I was there for 36 hours. And in that time, the clinic saw 36 different patients. I have a slide that goes through all the different things they had, but it's everything from malnourished children to people with HIV treatment who are in a bad state because they haven't been taking their medicines, to people who need an abdominal surgery of some sort, to someone who came in unconscious and we never figured out what happened to him before he died, to follow-up care for mothers and babies, malaria, obviously. So this is a doctor who was there. She's a German missionary who was working at the Gallo Clinic when I was there. All the medical staff now are from CAR. Everyone from the foreign country supports has pulled their people out, obviously with all the unrest. She said the father reported that this child was 5 to 7. Her take on it is the kid was probably 10, but the father was too embarrassed to admit how malnourished the kid was and how undergrown. Based on, she said medically, he looks like he's a 10-year-old, other than his physical condition. The mother died, and the father was extremely poor with multiple kids. Farming wasn't going well for him. And they were basically eating just manioc every day, which is kind of like a cassava root that is got lye in it, so it has to be sun-dried, kind of detoxified, ground, and then made into, I don't know what you'd call it, like a soggy ball-type bread. Kind of think like a gooey version of the Ethiopian bread or something like that, where it's kind of in a ball and you just pull off a piece of it with your food. Except people who are poor don't have the other food to eat with it. It has almost no nutritional value. It's just empty calories, basically. So this is another clinic that the Lutheran Church built in Guam. It's kind of far north from the rest of the stuff. It's a mother, it's basically a maternity ward, essentially. It does a few other things, but it's a mother and child type facility. They deliver, I don't know what it is today. This place was ransacked by rebels in a couple years into the war, maybe. And it has been restored. It's functioning again. But at the time I was there, they were delivering 1 to 2 babies a day there. So it serves as the maternity hospital for the whole region. I think I got another mother baby picture there, yeah. That's one of the nurses. They use a lot of like NP type people that are like highly trained nurses who can do a lot of medical, like more like what we would call doctor or PA or NP work here. That's common across all of Africa. And in Kenya, they call them clinical officers. I'm not sure what they call them here. And it's probably a translation of a French word that I don't know, but Village Savings and Loan. This is a program that was started by a European Union NGO with a 3-year grant to train, and then I guess you'd call it abandon them to run it on their own. And so the church did a great job of ramping this program up and taking over. This is one of them, functioning. So what it is there's basically a minimum savings you put in. It's an old school SNL. It's an old school savings and loan. It's people put in money. They have to put in a certain amount every week if you want to be a member. So you have to be disciplined about it. They can make exceptions by vote, but they don't like to. And then you also put a small amount each week, each month into a insurance fund that they use to help fund emergencies that people have. There was a village that had a fire and houses burned down that had a village savings and loan. And they decided to use the emergency fund instead of to rebuild the houses, to plant 2 extra crops of peanuts to sell. And they made enough money from that to not only rebuild the houses, but give people a little bit of money for the other emergencies that they faced. So they've been pretty, ingenious in how they've used their decisions. So they're making intelligent, interesting, wise decisions with how they use the funds as well. And then they count the money, they process it, they meet in a group. If there's anyone who needs a loan, it gets voted on by the group. So it's kind of like, the people that you can't trust with a loan, and you don't let them into your savings and loan, and you don't give them a loan if they get in somehow, right? So it's really interesting who runs it. I was surprised, and maybe this was the NGO's influence, or maybe it has to do with who holds the money in the home. But the many women were involved as officers of these. And the way it works is they've got a lockbox with multiple locks on it. And three different officers have a key to only their lock. So you can't steal from it. Yeah. I'm almost done. Come on. All right. And then the schools, this is the school I went to visit. This is a temporary school. Classes were, I think, like second to fourth grade in one room, or maybe second and third in one room and fourth to sixth in another. They basically do primary school, just so everyone can learn to read and write and do math. They use chalkboards to answer questions and just hold them up with the answers. They were all right. 2 was the answer to that question. You'll see one of the kids wrote it backwards. What they're trying to do now, rather than, they haven't been able to go to very many new villages, but what they're able to do is take the temporary schools and turn them into permanent schools. So transitioning a temporary school into a permanent school is one of their goals. And that is the project that our committee for the Synod has adopted as our project for October. It's $35,000 expense to build out a permanent school. And so our goal is to raise at least enough money for one school to be turned into a permanent school. Carolyn's going to talk a bit about the history of missionaries and Lutheranism in the CAR.
So this year is the centennial of the mission that led to the birth of the church. And so the church, the ELRCA, or we can say ELCCAR in English, considers this their 100th year anniversary. And they're having the celebration there in November. Before I talk about this, I wanted to just say one thing about what Lucky was saying about the Muslims and Christians. The Muslims and Christians traditionally have had very good relationships, the Lutherans anyway. And even today, the Catholic leaders, the Lutheran leaders, and the Muslim leaders work together to help improve things in the country. So it's just really since 2012, 2013 that there's been this aggravated conflict in some areas between the two. 100 years ago, on April 8th, 1923, Adolphus and Marie Gunderson, who were newlyweds from the Midwest, and deaconesses Ann Olson and Odette Burnson from Brooklyn arrived off of the coast of what is now Cameroon, which then a fishing village there. And they had come down the coast of Africa and on a packet boat, which is kind of a mail supply boat, take some passengers. They had come there to spread the gospel. And today there's the port of Douala there, but the boat could not get close to the shore because there wasn't any port there. So they had to stay there until a riverboat could come and get them and take them upriver to Douala. And you can't really see that well on this map, but over here is Cameroon, today Cameroon, and then Central African Republic here, and down here in the lower left is where they got off the boat. They had spent 3 years in France studying French and waiting for colonial permissions to go to the country and start a mission. All of them except Gunderson's wife. He briefly came back to the States and got married right before they went, so they were really newlyweds. Gunderson had been a missionary in Nigeria, and among missionaries at the time, there was a concern that there wasn't much evangelism going on in Africa in this area called the Sudan. And you can see in this is area here goes all the way across Africa. At that time, that was called the Sudan. It has nothing to do with modern country Sudan. But that's why this is called the Sudan mission, because Gunderson, he wanted to take the gospel there. He tried to get support in the US from the Norwegian American church, but they didn't feel they could support him at the time. They gave him their blessing though, so he started an independent mission, formed a board, raised funds, and went all across the US trying to recruit missionaries and started this Sudan mission. So when they arrived in Douala, they took a train as far as it went, which was about 100 miles upland, and then they had to go by foot. They had brought with them supplies to last several years, so they had to hire local. They hired 50 local porters to carry the supplies, and they walked for about 26 days, 500 miles to the town, what's now Gandere, kind of northwest from Douala. And then they didn't really stay there. Eventually, they went on to a place called Mbula, which is a little bit farther south in Cameroon. And this is the first mission station that was built there. What they did, of course, when they got there, they had to learn the local languages because only the colonial officials spoke French. They had to negotiate with the chiefs for permission to build a place to stay, for permission to share their message and so forth. And so they were very busy, and they were a very small group. Over the years, they got a few more people, and they gradually, would go to new villages and go through the same process again and spread the gospel. But the Africans proved very welcoming and were very interested. And so this is one of the early chapel services with an overflow crowd. All those people could not get inside, but they wanted to go to this chapel service. And just a little bit about their life, that you can see a little more about their life. This is when another couple more missionaries had come. This is the Gundersons here. She looks very unhappy, very stern. But anyway, that's the Gundersons and another couple and another missionary. And those are the workers at the Mbula station that helped. They had many Africans who helped, and who the Africans actually began evangelizing very soon on their own. So they really helped to spread the church a lot. And what was the other work of these missionaries? It's really the things that the church in Africa does today. Education, they started teaching children to read. Gunderson translated parts of the Bible into Baya, which is with a local language there, and then taught children to read from that. People came with illnesses or injuries, and so they tried to help them in health wise. Eventually a nurse came. So the healthcare and education have long been parts of the mission and the work of the church there today. The Sudan mission eventually gave birth to two national churches, which today are members of the Lutheran World Federation, the Lutheran Church of Cameroon, the Evangelical Lutheran Churches in Cameroon and in the Central African Republic. And the president of this church in CAR has just recently returned from the Lutheran World Federation assembly that was held in Poland. And one more picture, a couple more pictures here of the missionaries work. This is on a ferry that they took. And then this, I don't think you can see this very well, but this shows their work.
All blue.
Ogula is down here, and the two places in CAR are these two dots right there. Babua is the part right on the border, practically on the border. Those are the two main towns for the Lutherans today. And this in 1936, the Babua station established a Bible school, which is where they train what we call deacons. They call them evangelists and catechists. And here's an African, Daniel Yongara, who was preaching in 1936. So the ELC, the CAR is having its celebration of this. It considers this year the centennial of the church because of this mission. So they're having their celebration in November, and that's what Veronique and Bishop Mike are going to, plus the two bishops from the Eastern and Western North Dakota synods are going. A number of other people are going. The director of mission for Africa from ELCA is going. And that's going to be in November, but in July, we had a celebration here in the US for the Sudan mission, a centennial celebration. And you could look at this book if you're interested afterward. This was held in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I attended, and Charles Short from Louisiana represented our synod. And it was a couple of days, lots of missionaries there, former missionaries from CAR. And there were all day on the Saturday with panel discussions at Luther Seminary. And the president of the church in CAR and the bishop of the church in Cameroon, they have some slightly different systems, but most of the African Lutheran churches still use the word president from the French. They participated remotely. They were unable to get visas to come, unfortunately. But a couple of things they both said from both countries about the really strength of the church today there is the youth and the women, and both felt that these need to be resources need to be developed much more in the church. And we are hoping to have a visit this spring from President Goy of CAR, and also the president of the women's organization, Francine Yaiman, in time for our Synod Assembly. We'll see if they can get visas. But this was really it's unfortunately very difficult to get a visa from Africa to come here. But this is really how the church that we are companions with in Central African Republic got its start.
Sorry.
So,
something else.
This is our mission offering for October. Again, as Lucky said, we're hoping in the Synod to raise enough money to build a permanent school. And
I think that's the last one. Yeah.
I thought there was one that's in question.
Oh, there is one that says
Have any
questions, but I'm gonna leave the other.
Questions or comments?
I guess the link works.
What is that?
This is the page that we were linking to. And if you go to give online for this, I'll just walk through it so people can see. In this spot here, you just choose mission offering, monthly mission offering as the option. And it'll go to, if it comes in October, it'll go to CAR. Or you can pick other and type in CAR if it's, for example, if it's not October, at Christmas, you want to give another gift. So. Okay.
So all of October is gonna be mission offerings.
Yeah.
That's right.
Everything.
But are there any questions, I guess? Okay, I know the question you really want to ask is what are all these neat things up here? And I don't think they can see them online, but I brought all my pretty things. And so there's a small painting that I bought in CAR. There's a traditional style mask carving that was given to me by I still call him Bishop Golicky instead of President Golicky, because that's what the word we use. And he said he gave me the one with the biggest mouth that he could find. He knew me well. He stayed at our house a couple of times too. The middle there is a nativity from CAR that I bought while I was there, made out of cashew wood. So that bicolored wood is cashew wood. Then a few African animals that I picked up, and then a hat that I had made once I got back here. That's the CAR flag on the hat. I'm trying to figure out a way to get it on Travis Kelce or Taylor Swift's head so it can go viral and we can make some money for CAR off of it, but I haven't figured it out yet. So anyway,
This is the brochure from the Centennial. It's got some of the photographs that I gave, some articles from former missionaries. This is an extended article by a former missionary about his history of the Sudan mission. Look at it.
right. I think we are done.
Any questions? I mean, stop sharing. Any other questions?
So no one's asked any yet.
All right, well, that's a round of applause for our presenters. Thank you very much. So glad you could share a little bit more about the Central African Republic. Sorry I couldn't be here for most of it. I had a pastoral.
Apparently you recorded this, so you can watch it later.
I will, that's what I will do. Please join us next week. Pastor Jennifer and I will be presenting on a new kind of groups that we'll be having here at church called ecclesia groups. So come and join us. Come and join us. It will be part 1 of part 2 as we launch new small group ministry here at Christ the King Lutheran Church. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Sunday, and we'll see you in worship.